My sister hated her child, despite always wanting to be a mother. When I found out why, I destroyed both of our families. Hey Reddit, grab a snack and let's get into this. It's a bit long, but I need you to bear with me till the end. Definitely worth it. I'm 35 female, Teresa. Let me tell you about my sister Molly, who's basically what happens when toxic femininity meets a Pinterest addiction and daddy issues. This woman has been completely unhinged about having boys since we were kids. Like, clinically obsessed to the point where I should have seen this train wreck coming from space. Growing up, she only hung out with guys because girls were too much drama and couldn't be trusted. She'd roll her eyes whenever our female cousins visited, whispering basic behind their backs while acting like she understood men better than other women. Red flags? Yeah, it was like a parade of warning signs. When Molly got pregnant the first time, she threw this massive gender reveal party that looked like a Pinterest board had exploded all over our parents' backyard. Blew everything. Tablecloths, balloons shaped like baby bottles, cupcakes with little fondant mustaches. She'd already painted the nursery navy blue and bought nothing but boy clothes. This woman was so convinced she was carrying the next Messiah that she'd tell strangers when my son arrives, instead of when the baby comes. She'd rub her belly in public and coo stuff like, "Mommy's little man is going to be so strong," while other pregnant women looked at her like she'd lost her mind. The reveal happened in our backyard, with like 40 people watching. She had hired an actual photographer because she wanted professional memories of meeting her son. When that pink smoke exploded from the confetti cannon, I watched my sister's face completely freeze. Her smile locked in place like a computer crashing, and she tried to fake excitement, but her shoulders collapsed like someone had deflated her. The rest of the pregnancy was like watching a slow-motion car crash. She spent months posting articles about toxic femininity and joining Facebook groups for moms hoping for sons next time. She bought exclusively gender-neutral baby clothes in gray and beige, claiming she was being practical, but really just refusing to acknowledge she was gestating a human female. After Romy was born, things went from weird to seriously disturbing territory real quick. Molly would only dress her in gray or beige, nothing remotely feminine. When people bought Romy cute little dresses or hair bows as gifts, Molly would return them immediately or donate them like they were contaminated. Get this, she called her the baby, instead of using her actual name for the first 6 months. At family dinners, she'd complain that Romy was too emotional and too needy compared to other babies, because apparently being born female came with a personality defect. I remember one particularly brutal dinner where Romy was maybe 18 months old, just learning to walk and babbling like toddlers do. Our cousin's son, who was a few months older, was running around being a typical energetic boy. Molly watched him with this wistful expression and said, "See how independent he is? How strong and confident. Romy just cries and wants to be held all the time." The kid was barely 2 years old. Meanwhile, my husband Derek and I had been trying to have kids for 5 years in what can only be described as fertility hell. We'd done everything. Medications that made me feel terrible. Painful procedures that left me bedridden for days. The whole nightmare that drained our savings and nearly destroyed our marriage. Watching Molly treat Romy like an unwanted houseplant while we desperately wanted children was like being force-fed irony. I actually asked Molly once if she'd consider letting us adopt Romy, since she clearly didn't want her, and we'd give anything to have a child. We were at a family barbecue. Romy was playing quietly with blocks while Molly ignored her to talk about trying for baby number 2. The look she gave me was pure ice. She said she'd rather give Romy to strangers than let me adopt her because at least strangers wouldn't judge her parenting choices. I thought she was being dramatic and defensive. She was dead serious, and I was about to find out exactly how serious. Fast forward to last year, Molly announced her second pregnancy with the enthusiasm of someone announcing the second coming. She was absolutely militant about it being a boy this time. She tried every old wives' tale in the book, eating red meat exclusively, sleeping on her left side, timing conception to lunar cycles like she was some kind of fertility witch. She checked Chinese gender calendars obsessively, cross-referenced them with Mayan pregnancy predictions, the works. Here's where it gets really messed up. She flat out said multiple times that if this baby was a girl, she was terminating. Not considering termination, or would be disappointed, straight up said she'd abort rather than have another daughter. When our 78-year-old grandmother heard that, she nearly had a stroke right there at Sunday dinner. But Molly doubled down, saying she couldn't handle the emotional burden of raising girls, and that boys are just easier to love. The second gender reveal party was even more intense than the first, because apparently she'd learned from her previous mistake. She'd hired a professional party planner. We're talking smoke machines, confetti cannons, and a drone that dropped colored powder from above like we were announcing the election of a new pope. When blue smoke filled the air, Molly literally dropped to her knees, sobbing with joy like she'd just won the lottery. She was screaming, "I knew it! I knew it!" over and over while everyone cheered and clapped, completely losing her mind with relief. 3-year-old Romy waddled over to hug her mom, probably confused about why everyone was acting like maniacs over colored smoke. She was wearing this little yellow dress, looking like the sweetest kid in the world, just wanting some attention from her mother. Molly straight up pushed her away without even looking at her, too lost in her celebration to acknowledge her existing child. Romy stumbled backward and scraped her knee on a metal swing set, immediately bursting into tears. Everyone just stood there in shock while Romy bled and cried, and Molly continued hugging people and accepting congratulations like her daughter was invisible. I was the one who picked Romy up and cleaned her scraped knee with a wet napkin while everyone else pretended it wasn't happening. She clung to me while I put a Batman Band-Aid on her cut and whispered, "Aunt loves Romy?" In that heartbreaking way, little kids ask for reassurance when their world doesn't make sense. I told her yes, I loved her very much, and she smiled for the first time that whole afternoon. We didn't see much of Molly during the pregnancy after that mess. She decided to give birth in Europe because it would be cheaper and a better experience, which made zero sense since she had excellent insurance here and spoke exactly 0 European languages. But whatever, her choice, right? She said she wanted to start fresh with the new baby somewhere that appreciated traditional family values. The whole thing felt sketchy as heck, but she was an adult making her own messed up decisions, and I had my own life to worry about. 2 months after baby Brody was born, our whole family hopped on a FaceTime call to meet him. 7 of us, total. Grandparents, aunts, uncles. The works. At first, it was actually sweet. Molly was showing off little Brody in his mommy's boy onesie, and he was genuinely adorable with Derek's dark hair and these perfect tiny fingers. She was glowing, cooing over him, calling him her little king and perfect angel. It was the happiest I'd seen her since, ever, actually. Then my aunt asked the obvious question that we'd all been thinking. Where's Romy? We haven't seen her in months. Is she napping? Molly's face went white. She started stuttering, mumbling something about Romy not being there. And it's complicated, which is universally code for, I've done something terrible, and you're about to find out. When my aunt pressed her to explain where exactly Romy was, since she'd been radio silent about her daughter for months, the truth came out. Molly had put Romy up for adoption in mid-December while she was 6 months pregnant with Brody. Her reasoning? She couldn't handle 2 kids, and giving Romy away before Christmas would save money on presents that she needed for the Europe trip. She'd gone through a private agency that specialized in difficult placements, and specifically requested a family far enough away that there'd be no chance of accidental contact. She wanted Romy gone, permanently, completely. The FaceTime call exploded into absolute chaos that would have made reality TV producers weep with joy. My grandmother started clutching her chest and having trouble breathing, gasping about her baby girl being given away like garbage. I was screaming at Molly that Derek and I could have taken Romy, though Derek looked uncomfortable as heck when I said that, shifting in his seat and avoiding eye contact with the camera. Molly just sat there holding Brody, getting more defensive and angry as we all yelled at her, until she finally just disconnected the call while my grandmother was being rushed to the ER for what turned out to be a panic attack. That night, I found Derek in our bedroom at 2 a.m., hunched over his phone with the brightness turned all the way down like he was hiding state secrets. He was scrolling through his photo gallery, deleting pictures. In the brief moments I could see the screen, they were all from 3 years ago, random black and white images that looked suspiciously like ultrasound pictures. The timeline matched exactly when I was pregnant before my miscarriage at 12 weeks. Coincidence? Maybe. But my gut said otherwise, and my gut had never steered me wrong before. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was really wrong about Derek's reaction to the Romy situation. He'd been weird, uncomfortable, almost guilty. So I did what any reasonable person would do when their intuition is screaming at them. I hired a family attorney who specialized in adoption cases and parental rights violations. My aunt had given me a referral to someone discreet who had experience with questionable adoptions and missing consent issues. Someone who understood that when privileged people start giving away children, there's usually more to the story than, oops, changed my mind. I told the lawyer to look into whether Romy's adoption was even legal, thinking maybe we could challenge it through proper channels and get her back where she belonged. The attorney worked fast and thorough. Within the first consultation, She flagged a massive red flag that could blow the whole thing wide open. Where was the biological father's consent? Private adoption agencies are required by law to make reasonable efforts to locate and notify biological fathers, she explained, pulling up state statutes on her laptop. If Molly claimed she didn't know who the father was, they should have checked the putative father registry. If she named someone, that person had to consent or legally relinquish rights. No exceptions. The attorney immediately contacted Sunshine Private Adoption Agency and invoked their 6-month reversal window for cases involving fraudulent or incomplete documentation. Turns out they'd been getting increasingly nervous about the Romy placement because the Oregon family had been documenting behavioral issues and asking uncomfortable questions about missing medical history and family background information. When my lawyer pressed them about biological father notification, their tune changed real quick. Molly had claimed Romy was the result of a one-night stand with someone whose name she couldn't remember, which is conveniently unprovable and legally problematic. The agency had done a basic putative father registry check, but nothing more substantial. They were suddenly very interested in cooperating with our investigation to cover their own butts and avoid a lawsuit that could destroy their business. My attorney filed a motion for emergency discovery, requesting subpoenas for hotel records, credit card receipts, cell phone tower data, and bank statements from 3 years ago. She also petitioned the court for forensic imaging of Derek's devices and iCloud account to recover deleted communications, because apparently cheating husbands aren't as good at covering their tracks as they think they are. Within 2 weeks, we had hotel receipts showing Derek and Molly at a Marriott downtown on 3 separate occasions while I was hospitalized recovering from my miscarriage. The dates were damning. The court-ordered forensic analysis of Derek's phone revealed recovered text messages that painted a picture I really didn't want to see, but absolutely needed to know about. Messages about keeping this between us, and she can never know, and we both needed comfort during a difficult time. The metadata showed these conversations happened exactly 9 months before Romy was born. The math was undeniable and devastating. When my attorney petitioned for a court-ordered paternity test, Derek tried to fight it through his own lawyer, claiming it was harassment and invasion of privacy. But the judge wasn't having any of that nonsense, especially when the adoption agency was fully cooperating now, desperate to avoid a lawsuit that could expose their sloppy practices to every family law attorney in the state. The DNA results came back exactly as I'd suspected, 99.7% probability that Derek was Romy's biological father. The Oregon adoptive family immediately filed affidavits with the court documenting Romy's distress, her constant questions about her real family, and their own concerns about missing background information that made caring for her nearly impossible. They were actually relieved to learn about the legal issues, because they'd been struggling with Romy's behavioral problems and felt like they'd been misled about her needs and trauma history. I spent a week gathering everything together with my attorney, because I'm not the type to blow up and start screaming. I'm more of a let them hang themselves with their own rope while I document everything kind of person. We prepared a complete legal file with all the evidence, court orders, and documentation, then waited for the perfect moment to drop this nuclear bomb and watch their world burn. That moment came when both Derek and Molly were supposed to come over for dinner to catch up about the whole Romy situation. They'd been texting each other constantly since the family call exploded, and I was supposed to be oblivious to that. I sat in my car outside our building for 30 minutes, watching them arrive. Derek showed up first, parking his car and sitting there for 10 minutes, checking his phone nervously. Then Molly pulled up in her BMW, and they exchanged this quick glance before walking toward the entrance together. The kind of look two people share when they're about to face the consequences from the disaster they've done together. My hands were shaking as I gripped the manila envelope containing 3 years' worth of lies, betrayal, and court-documented evidence that would destroy everything. I waited 5 minutes before going upstairs. When I walked into our apartment, they were sitting there like nothing had happened. Derek was scrolling through his phone on the couch, legs spread in that casual way. Molly stood by the kitchen counter with a glass of water, both of them acting completely normal. "Hey, babe," Derek said without looking up. "Molly just got here. We were just talking about how crazy this whole thing is." I set the manila envelope on the coffee table with a soft thud. "We need to talk. All 3 of us. Right now." Molly rolled her eyes in that entitled way she'd perfected since childhood. "If this is about Romy again, I told you it's done. The adoption is final. I'm not changing my mind because you're having some maternal crisis and want to play house." I opened the envelope and spread everything across the table. Court orders, subpoenaed hotel receipts, phone records, bank statements showing cash withdrawals, forensic analysis reports, And finally, the court ordered DNA test results that would end their little conspiracy once and for all. Derek's face went white as he recognized the official letterheads, his phone slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers and clattering to the floor. "What the heck is this?" His voice cracked. "You know exactly what it is. 3 years ago, while I was in the hospital losing our baby, Derek, you were with my sister, in hotel rooms, multiple times. While I was grieving the loss of our child, you two were having an affair and creating a replacement." Molly actually laughed. "Oh my God, you hired someone to investigate this? That's genuinely pathetic. You're so desperate to be a victim that you're making up theories now. Is it a conspiracy theory that Romy is Derek's daughter?" I held up the court-ordered DNA results, watching both their faces crumble like sandcastles hit by waves. "Is it pathetic that you gave away his child without telling him? Or did he know all along?" Derek shot to his feet so fast his phone clattered to the floor, the screen spiderwebbing against the hardwood with a satisfying crack. "This is fake. You're making this up because you're jealous that Molly had kids and you couldn't. You've been obsessed with Romy since she was born, always trying to insert yourself into our family." The gaslight was fascinating. Not for too long. That's when I pulled out my phone and hit play on the audio recording I'd been saving. Derek's voice filled the room, tinny but clear through my phone speaker. "We can't let her know about Romy's real father. If she finds out, it'll destroy everything we've built." The timing was perfect. She was so focused on her own loss that she never questioned the dates or asked uncomfortable questions. Molly's voice responded, "I know, but what if she figures it out eventually? Someone's going to notice." Derek again. "She won't. She trusts us completely. And even if she suspects something, she'll never be able to prove it without evidence." The recording was from my own security system, the one Molly had insisted I install after Brody was born, for safety. The irony was almost funny. Almost. "I've already filed for divorce, Derek. Our joint accounts are frozen as of this morning. You'll be getting papers tomorrow, along with a copy of everything in this envelope sent to your office, your parents, and anyone else who needs to know what kind of man you really are." He lunged for the documents, but I pulled them back smoothly. "Half our money is gone. You can't just freeze our accounts without warning. You can't do this to me. Actually, I can do whatever I want." Infidelity tends to affect asset division pretty significantly, especially when there's a secret child involved and 3 years of lies documented by court order. Quick pause, fellas. YouTube just dropped this new hype feature. If you're hooked on this story, smash that hype button. It tells YouTube this video deserves to blow up, and it keeps even crazier stories coming your way. Thanks so much for your support. All right, back to the drama. I turned to Molly, who was gripping her water glass so hard. "Did Derek ever give you money for Romy? Child support? Anything at all?" Her carefully constructed composure finally cracked like a dam bursting under pressure. "He said he couldn't without you finding out and asking questions. He promised once you divorced him, he'd help financially, and maybe we could be a real family. But then you kept trying for a baby, and he said the timing wasn't right for him to leave. And just like that, they turned on each other like sharks." Derek accused Molly of trapping him, of seducing him when he was vulnerable and grieving. Molly screamed about raising his child alone for years while he played happy husband with me and enjoyed the benefits of both families. She threw her glass at the wall, and it exploded in a shower of glass and water that made me jump back, but also felt oddly satisfying. "You said you loved me," Molly shouted, her voice rising to near hysteria. "You said being with her was obligation, but being with me was choice. You said I understood you in ways she never could. I was grieving and messed up about losing the baby. You took advantage of me when I was emotionally destroyed. I just stepped back and watched their conspiracy crumble into mutual blame and ugly accusations like the house of cards it had always been. 3 years of secret coordination falling apart in under 10 minutes. That's when my grandmother walked in, supported by my aunt and uncle like some kind of elderly Justice League assembling for the final battle. Despite her recent hospital stay after the FaceTime call from Heck, her eyes blazed with the kind of determination that had carried her through raising 4 kids, burying a husband, and surviving the Great Depression. She took one look at the broken glass, the scattered papers, and Derek and Molly pointing fingers at each other, and her face set in stone. "Enough," grandmother's voice cut through their arguing like a knife. "Molly, we need to talk about this adoption. Right now." Molly crossed her arms defensively. "It's done. Closed adoption. No contact. I made sure of it specifically so you people couldn't interfere with my decisions." My aunt stepped forward, and I could see her putting on her professional prosecutor voice. "Sunshine Private Adoption Agency, right? I recognize the name from the papers you signed. I work with them regularly in family court when things go wrong. Molly's smugness faltered for the first time, her confidence cracking. So what? What does that matter? They have a 6-month reversal window for cases where biological parents weren't properly informed or consent was obtained fraudulently. Biological parents can reclaim children if both parents didn't consent to the adoption. My aunt looked directly at Derek with intensity. Did you sign anything? Any papers at all? Any acknowledgement that you were giving up parental rights? Derek shook his head slowly, looking like he was starting to understand how completely screwed he really was. I didn't even know she was pregnant until after Romy was born. Molly told me it was from a one-night stand with some guy from her gym whose name she couldn't remember. I chose a family in Oregon specifically so you couldn't find her and ruin everything. Molly spat at me, her voice rising to near hysteria. She's probably already attached to them by now. She doesn't even remember any of you people. I made sure of that. I pulled out another document from my envelope, one I'd been saving for maximum impact. Actually, they've been trying to contact the agency for weeks. The adoption placement has been flagged as problematic by the state. Molly grabbed for her phone with shaking hands, like it might somehow save her from what was coming. What the heck are you talking about? Apparently, you didn't disclose Romy's behavioral issues. You know, all those problems you complained about constantly for 3 years. The attachment issues, the emotional neediness, the sleep problems you said made her difficult and too much work. I watched her face go pale as the implications hit her. The family wasn't prepared for a traumatized child. Derek was staring at me like I'd grown a second head and started speaking in tongues. How do you know all this? How long have you been planning this? Because they contacted the agency 2 weeks ago about the placement difficulties and their concerns about missing background information. My lawyer has been in communication with them since the court ordered the paternity test. Turns out when you lie on adoption paperwork and the biological father never consented, it voids the entire placement. Grandmother moved closer to Molly. You have 2 choices, little girl. Cooperate with getting Romy back to this family where she belongs, or I'll remove you from my will entirely, along with any provisions for Brody's future. Molly's face went red with rage. You can't threaten me with money. I'm an adult. I make my own decisions about my children. Watch your damn tone, kid. And it's not a bluff. That child deserves better than being thrown away because you only wanted boys. She deserves a family that actually wants her. Derek looked between Molly and my grandmother, finally understanding that his little secret had blown up in his face. Look, we can fight this together. We can get custody of our daughter and work something out that benefits everyone. Our daughter? Molly whirled on him like a tornado. You gave away our daughter. You let me think she was someone else's for 3 years. You watched me struggle as a single mom and never said a word. You didn't want her either, Derek shot back, his voice cracking with desperation. You were relieved when I said I was handling the situation. You said it was better this way for everyone involved. My aunt held up her phone calmly, like she was taking a casual selfie. I'm recording this entire conversation, by the way. Your admission that you conspired to hide Romy's paternity and gave her away specifically to hurt your sister will be very interesting evidence in family court. The room went dead silent. Everyone was staring at each other like pieces on a chessboard, trying to figure out the next move. But I already knew how this was going to end. I'd been planning for every contingency since the moment I hired that attorney. The next few hours were a blur of lawyers, phone calls, and legal maneuvering. My lawyer, who specialized in family law and had connections throughout the state court system, started making calls while my uncle blocked Molly's car in the driveway so she couldn't leave until everything was sorted out. We weren't letting her disappear again. The adoption agency confirmed they were bringing Romy back that evening. The Oregon family, bless their hearts, had been documenting Romy's behavioral issues and her constant questions about her real family for weeks. They'd done everything right, followed all protocols, but a traumatized 3-year-old with abandonment issues was more than they'd signed up for when they thought they were adopting a healthy child. When they learned about the fraudulent paperwork and the biological father who'd never consented, they were actually relieved to return her. They'd been feeling like failures, wondering what they were doing wrong, not realizing they'd been set up to fail from the beginning. When the adoptive family arrived at my grandmother's house around 7 p.m., my heart shattered into a million pieces and reassembled itself all at once. Romy looked smaller than I remembered, wearing a pink coat I'd never seen and carrying a tiny suitcase covered in Disney princess stickers. She clutched a stuffed elephant and looked confused and scared, scanning the crowd of familiar faces. The past few months had clearly been hard on her. The adoptive mother, Sia, looked exhausted in the way that only parents of troubled children understand. Her husband stood behind her protectively, one hand on Romy's shoulder. She's been asking for Auntie for weeks, Sia said. Crying every night, drawing pictures of a house with a woman who has brown hair. The therapist said she was processing abandonment trauma, but we didn't know how to help her heal. When Molly pushed through the crowd of family members, Romy immediately backed away, hiding behind Sia's legs like she was facing a stranger. The rejection was brutal and absolutely devastating to watch. I don't know you, Romy whispered, her little voice barely audible but cutting through the tension like a blade. Molly dropped to her knees on my grandmother's front porch, desperation replacing her earlier defiance. I'm your mommy, baby. Remember? We lived together. We had breakfast together every morning. I read you stories. Romy shook her head firmly, pressing closer to the people who'd actually taken care of her for the past few months. Then her eyes found me in the crowd, and her face lit up with recognition, like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. She ran to me and wrapped her small arms around my legs. Auntie, you came back, she said, looking up at me with those huge eyes that were so much like Derek's it hurt. I knew you would come. I told them you would. I knelt down to her level, fighting back tears that threatened to turn me into a sobbing mess in front of everyone. I'm here, sweetheart. You're safe now. You're coming home where you belong. Molly's scream of rage sent Romy into tears and sent several neighbors rushing to their windows to see what the heck was happening. The scene dissolved into chaos as my grandmother ushered everyone inside while lawyers prepared emergency custody papers, and Romy clung to me like her life depended on it. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for 3 days later. Those 72 hours became a battlefield that would have made Sun Tzu proud of the strategic maneuvering happening on all sides. Molly showed up at my grandmother's house at 6 a.m. the first morning, pounding on the door and demanding her daughter like some kind of unhinged person who'd lost touch with reality. My uncle, who'd stayed overnight specifically to prevent this exact scenario, opened the door just wide enough to inform her that any contact needed to go through lawyers from now on. Derek showed up that afternoon while I was there with Romy, trying to do damage control for his reputation and maybe salvage some parental rights before everything went completely to heck. Romy was coloring quietly at the kitchen table, still withdrawn and confused. I want to see my daughter, Derek announced, like he had any right to demand anything after 3 years of abandonment and betrayal. The daughter you never acknowledged for 3 years? I kept my voice level and calm, not wanting to upset Romy, who was listening to every word. The one you let Molly give away without saying a single word to protect her? He turned on me then, ugly and desperate. At least I didn't have to hire a lawyer to stalk my own family. How long were you planning this revenge fantasy? How long were you waiting to steal her from us? Before I could respond with the dozen cutting remarks I had ready, Romy spoke up in a small, confused voice. Why is everyone yelling about me? We all froze. Derek, me, my uncle who'd been standing guard. Everyone just stopped talking and stared at this girl. I moved to her side immediately, kneeling beside her chair and speaking in the gentlest voice I could manage. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about important things, sweetheart, but you don't need to worry about any of it. You're safe, and I'm here to protect you. She looked at Derek with those serious eyes. Are you my daddy? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Derek's mouth opened and closed without any sound coming out. He looked at me, then at my uncle, then back at Romy, clearly hoping someone else would answer for him because he was too much of a coward to face his own daughter. Finally, he just turned and left without saying another word to the child he claimed to want so desperately. Romy watched him go through the window, then returned to her coloring as if nothing had happened, but I noticed she was pressing much harder with her crayons. The custody hearing was a mess of epic proportions from the moment we walked into the courthouse. Molly arrived 20 minutes late, disheveled and clearly having a bad day, wearing wrinkled clothes and sunglasses indoors, like some kind of celebrity avoiding paparazzi. Her lawyer had withdrawn from the case the night before after she'd been arrested for threatening court officials via social media, posting unhinged rants like, "The system is rigged against real mothers," and "I'll burn it all down before I let them steal my daughter." Derek sat on the opposite side of the courtroom with his new attorney. He'd apparently convinced himself that he still had some kind of legal standing, despite never acknowledging Romy's existence and allowing her to be adopted without his consent. The delusion was almost impressive. Judge Harrison didn't mess around or waste time with pleasantries. She immediately addressed Molly's arrest, noting that threatening court officials demonstrated poor judgment and impulse control that raised serious questions about her fitness as a parent of any child, let alone a traumatized one. My lawyer presented our case methodically, the psychological evaluation showing Romy's attachment to me, the documented evidence of Molly giving her away out of spite, the supervised visit reports showing Molly's complete inability to connect with her daughter. When the child psychologist testified about Romy's situation, his clinical terms made my chest ache with fury at what had been done to an innocent child. Reactive attachment disorder, abandonment anxiety, trust issues that could last a lifetime if not properly addressed. The abandonment had created deep insecurity where she believed she'd been thrown away for being wrong or bad, simply for being born female. Her attachment to me was her only stable relationship, and removing her now would cause irreparable psychological harm that could affect her ability to form healthy relationships for the rest of her life. Molly tried to cross-examine him without a lawyer, but her questions were rambling and accusatory. She kept insisting that he'd been paid off, that the whole system was rigged against her, that Romy was just being manipulated by me and didn't know what she really wanted. The judge warned her twice about proper courtroom behavior before threatening to hold her in contempt and have her removed by bailiffs. The woman was completely unhinged and made her own case worse with every word that came out of her mouth. Derek's attorney painted him as a victim of manipulation, conveniently ignoring his affair and 3 years of abandoning his daughter like she didn't exist. But when he testified about wanting to be part of Romy's life, now that he understood she was his daughter, he couldn't answer basic questions about Romy's favorite food, her bedtime routine, or even her middle name. The man who claimed to want custody didn't know a single meaningful detail about the child he'd helped create and then abandoned. During a recess, Molly cornered us in the hallway. She dropped to her knees and grabbed Romy's shoulders, her voice high and frantic with the desperation of someone who finally understood they were losing. "Tell them you want to come home with Mommy. Tell them you love me and miss me, and want to be my little girl again." Romy pulled away immediately, pressing against my legs for protection. "You're not my mom anymore." The court officer intervened before Molly could grab her again, but the damage was done. Romy spent the rest of the hearing in my lap, face buried in my shoulder, refusing to look at either Derek or Molly. When the judge asked if she wanted to speak to either of them, she shook her head and whispered, "I want to go home with Auntie." Judge Harrison's ruling was swift and absolutely brutal. She granted me full legal custody, citing the fraudulent adoption paperwork, the lack of biological father consent, and Romy's clear psychological trauma from the placement. Molly was granted no visitation rights pending completion of parenting classes, anger management therapy, and psychological evaluation. Basically a list of requirements that would take years to complete if she even tried. Derek's petition was denied entirely due to his abandonment and failure to establish any meaningful relationship with the child. Molly shot to her feet like she'd been electrocuted, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "You can't do this! She's mine! I gave birth to her! This is kidnapping!" "And then you gave her away like a piece of furniture you didn't want anymore," Judge Harrison replied. Security moved toward Molly as she started advancing on the bench, her face twisted with rage. She spun toward me, pointing her finger like a weapon loaded with 3 years of hatred. "This isn't over! I'll appeal! I'll fight this until you're bankrupt! She's my daughter and I'll never stop trying to get her back!" Derek slipped out during the commotion, not even glancing at his daughter. The coward couldn't even stick around to face the consequences of his own actions. He just disappeared like the spineless piece of work he'd always been. The formal adoption process took 8 months of background checks, home visits, and court appearances. Romy started kindergarten at a new school where no one knew her history. She made friends with a girl named Sophie. Watching her laugh and play like a normal kid was better than any revenge. 3 months in, Derek sent a single email. "I'm moving to Seattle for work. I won't contest the adoption. Just take care of her." 5 sentences. That's all his daughter got after 3 years of lies. I forwarded it to my lawyer for the file. Molly's appeals went nowhere. She showed up to every court date looking worse for wear, ranting about conspiracies. She lost her job after missing shifts for court appearances. Our parents eventually took custody of Brody after multiple incidents where she'd left him unattended, including leaving him in a car seat for 4 hours while she passed out. The adoption was finalized on a Tuesday in November. Romy wore a purple dress and carried the stuffed elephant. When asked if she wanted to be my daughter forever, she said yes, in a clear voice that carried to the back of the courtroom. I became mommy that day, officially, legally. 6 months later, at Romy's school art show, I met Ethan. His daughter was Romy's best friend. Ethan was widowed and understood complicated family dynamics. We talked while our girls played, swapping stories about bedtime routines. Things developed slowly because our kids came first. Molly eventually got clean and found work at a call center. She saw Brody on weekends under supervision, but never stopped claiming we'd stolen Romy. The fight had gone out of her. She was just going through the motions of being angry. Romy still goes to therapy monthly, learning that none of what happened was her fault. She laughs now. She knows she's loved, wanted, and chosen every day. Molly had been right about one thing. I'd never be Romy's real mother biologically, but I was her mother in every way that mattered. Through bedtime stories and scraped knees, first days of school and soccer practices, nightmares and birthday parties. Derek and Molly thought they were clever, but karma delivered justice more thoroughly than I could have planned.